He was with his mistress in first class, but he never imagined who just boarded. Subscribe, like this video, leave your comments below. Buckle up. This story is about to launch you into an abyss of intrigue and vengeance. Hold on. Before this flight takes off into uncharted territory of betrayals and revelations, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Give this video a huge like and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single twist of fate. And now, prepare yourselves, because what you're about to read isn't just a simple journey. It's a ticking time bomb. The crystal champagne flutes clinked softly in first class, muffled by plush leather seats and an atmosphere thick with self-satisfaction. Mr. George Whitmore leaned back in his window seat, his platinum watch catching the cabin's warm lighting, subtle, intentional, like everything he orchestrated. Across from him, Ms. Sophia Laurent laughed melodiously at his mediocre joke, her bare shoulders gleaming, the diamond tennis bracelet he'd bought her just hours ago sparkling on her delicate wrist. She was radiant, glowing with the confidence of someone who truly believed she had won the prize. "Did you really tell your wife you were at that boring pharmaceutical conference in Geneva?" she purred, swirling her Dom Perignon. He smiled, his eyes tracing the curve of her collarbone exposed by her silk dress. What she doesn't know won't hurt her. Besides, she's too busy with her charity galas to notice I'm gone. Sophia smiled and reached for his manicured hand. Everything felt perfectly orchestrated. The vintage champagne, the upgraded suite at the Ritz in Rome, the whispered compliments from flight attendants who recognized him from Forbes's most influential CEOs under 50 lists. Even the clouds beyond the window seemed to part just for him. If this story is gripping you, subscribe to the channel, hit like, share, and tell us where you're watching from. Power was his oxygen, and today the air was intoxicatingly thick with it. George Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, had built a pharmaceutical empire worth $2.8 billion. At 45, he was untouchable, unstoppable, and utterly convinced of his own invincibility. A flight attendant approached with her practiced smile. "Mr. Whitmore will be departing shortly. Can I bring you anything else before takeoff?" "Another bottle of the Dom Perignon," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to instant compliance. "And perhaps something sweet for my companion here. She's celebrating her promotion to, let's call it, Director of Special Projects." Sophia blushed prettily, playing her part to perfection. The flight attendant smiled politely and glided away, returning moments later with the champagne and an elegant selection of Belgian chocolates. But this time, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a discreet whisper that didn't match the warmth of her professional smile. "Sir," she said quietly, "there's a woman in economy with 2 young children who asked me to deliver a message. She said to tell you that the twins are asking about Daddy."
The champagne glass didn't shatter, but George's grip loosened enough that it tilted dangerously. Sophia's gasp was sharp in the sudden silence that seemed to envelope their corner of first class. The background hum of the aircraft's systems felt deafening. "What?" George's voice was barely audible, strangled. The flight attendant stepped back slightly, her expression carefully neutral. "She asked not to be disturbed during the flight, said you'd understand." Sophia blinked rapidly, confusion and dawning horror battling across her features. "Wait, what is she talking about? What twins?" George didn't answer. His mind was racing, searching frantically for explanations, escape routes, damage control strategies. Could it be someone else? A case of mistaken identity? But deep in his gut he knew. The ice-cold certainty settled in his stomach like a stone. Clara. She had found him.
The plane hadn't even pushed back from the gate yet. He turned his head slowly toward the cabin divider, toward economy class, toward the woman who wasn't supposed to exist in his carefully compartmentalized world. Sophia leaned closer, her voice pitched higher with growing panic. "George, is this an ex-girlfriend? Some kind of stalker?" He couldn't move. His hand gripped the armrest until his knuckles went white. This wasn't part of the script. He had taken every precaution. Private investigators to monitor Clara's movements, encrypted communications, NDAs with everyone on his payroll. She wasn't supposed to know about this trip, let alone be on the same aircraft. And twins? The twins? Who is she? Sophia's voice was sharper now, cutting through his paralysis. Finally, George turned to face her, his jaw tight, his expression shifting from charming confidence to something cornered and dangerous. "She's nobody," he said, but even he could hear how hollow the words sounded. Behind them, the cabin door sealed with a definitive thud. The aircraft began to hum with pre-flight activity. The captain's voice welcomed passengers aboard. Flight attendants began their final safety checks. The outside world started shrinking to pressurized metal and inescapable consequences. Sophia pulled her hand back from his, her intuition finally catching up to her naivety. George. But George Whitmore, the man who had built an empire by always staying 3 steps ahead of his competition, sat frozen in his leather seat, realizing with growing horror that he was about to spend the next 9 hours trapped at 40,000 feet with the woman he had abandoned and the 2 children he had never acknowledged. If you're already hooked by this incredible setup, you need to smash that subscribe button right now. This story is about to get absolutely wild. Clara Chen tightened her grip on the double stroller as she approached the boarding gate. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours in any single stretch for the past 2 weeks, and the exhaustion showed in the dark circles under her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. Her navy blazer was wrinkled from the international flight connections, her black hair pulled back in a utilitarian ponytail, and she carried the faint scent of baby formula and sleepless determination. The twins cooed softly in their carriers, 2 beautiful children barely 18 months old. Jasmine was fighting sleep, her tiny fists waving at the overhead fluorescent lights, while Ethan had already surrendered to dreams, his cherubic face peaceful and trusting. They were oblivious to the calculated revenge their mother was about to orchestrate. She moved through the jet bridge with deliberate steps. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear. Anticipation had a way of mimicking anxiety, and Clara had learned to distinguish between the two during the long months of preparation that had led to this moment. As she boarded the aircraft, a flight attendant greeted her warmly. "Welcome aboard, ma'am." Clara nodded and continued walking, her eyes briefly grazing the first-class cabin divider. He was there. She could sense his presence like a disturbance in the air pressure. But she didn't stop, didn't look, didn't acknowledge him. Not yet. Her seat was in economy, row 28 by the window. She hadn't requested an upgrade. She didn't need luxury for what she was about to do. She was here for precision, for timing, for the story she was about to rewrite. She had spent 8 months tracking his every move, hired a private investigator with money she'd scraped together from her pharmaceutical consulting work, monitored his credit card statements through a contact in his accounting department who owed her a favor, followed his secretary's calendar, his mistress's social media, his travel patterns. She didn't want just revenge. She wanted documentation. She wanted proof. She wanted justice served at precisely the right moment, in exactly the right way, with maximum impact and minimum escape routes. The fastened seatbelt sign illuminated. The captain's voice filled the cabin with routine announcements. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." Clara cradled both twins against her chest as the engines began their pre-flight sequence. She didn't flinch as the aircraft lurched slightly, beginning its taxi toward the runway. As the plane gathered momentum, something else lifted off with them: her silence, her shame, her willingness to be erased from George Whitmore's narrative. Jasmine whimpered softly. Clara whispered against her daughter's soft hair, "Shh, sweetheart. Daddy's going to meet you properly very soon." Further ahead, beyond the divider, George Whitmore was probably still basking in first-class luxury, perhaps ordering another bottle of champagne, perhaps whispering promises to his latest conquest that he had no intention of keeping. He had no idea that this flight, this pressurized metal tube hurtling through the sky, now belonged entirely to her. This is just the beginning, and it's about to get incredible. If you're loving this story of strategic revenge, hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what happens next. The engines roared to life, and as the aircraft lifted off the tarmac, Clara Chen closed her eyes briefly and allowed herself the smallest of smiles. This wasn't turbulence she was feeling. This was momentum. The seatbelt sign clicked off 20 minutes into the flight. Flight attendants began gliding through the aisles with drink service. Sophia uncrossed her legs, stretching elegantly in her seat, but her eyes remained fixed on George with growing concern. He hadn't touched his champagne. He hadn't responded to her attempts at conversation. He sat rigid in his seat, staring straight ahead with the intensity of a man trying to solve an equation that kept changing its variables. His phone buzzed against the leather armrest. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening as he read the screen, then angled it away from Sophia's curious gaze. She caught only a glimpse of a name: Clara. Her stomach dropped. "Already working?" she asked lightly, forcing her voice to maintain its usual playful tone. "I thought this was supposed to be our romantic getaway." George didn't look up from his phone. "Just something urgent that needs handling." She nodded, but her mind was spinning. Clara. He had mentioned that name before, months ago, during one of their late-night conversations when he'd been drinking expensive scotch and feeling philosophical about his life. "My wife is cold, calculating. She controls every aspect of our marriage like a business merger. But Clara, she was different. She saw the real me, you know? Unfortunately, she wanted things I couldn't give her." Sophia had felt special hearing him open up like that, vulnerable and honest in a way that made her feel like the center of his universe. Now, 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, she was beginning to understand that vulnerability might have been just another performance. "Here, let me pause for a moment. Do you think Sophia suspected the truth before this flight? Tell us in the comments what you think was going through her mind." Flashback. 2 years earlier at the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills. Clara Chen had been waiting in the suite for over an hour when George finally arrived. His tie loosened, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a nervous habit she'd learned to recognize. "We need to talk," he'd said without preamble, not even kissing her hello. She'd been sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing the dress she'd chosen carefully for their dinner reservation. A reservation he'd obviously missed. In her hands was a manila envelope containing ultrasound images, test results, and a future that suddenly felt very uncertain. "I'm pregnant," she'd said simply. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours. George's face cycled through expressions: surprise, calculation, something that might have been panic, and finally a cold composure that she'd never seen directed at her before. "Are you sure it's mine?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "Of course it's yours. How can you even—" "Clara, you have to understand my position. I'm in the middle of a merger that could double my company's value. My wife's family has connections I need. This complication, it could destroy everything I've worked for." Complication. He'd called their unborn children a complication. Back on the plane, Sophia watched George's profile as he continued scrolling through his messages. His jaw was tight, his breathing controlled in that way people breathe when they're trying not to panic. "You know," she said carefully, "you've never really talked about your children. From your first marriage." George's thumb stopped moving on his phone screen. "What? Your children? You mentioned having kids, but you never really—" "I don't even know their names." For the first time since takeoff, George looked directly at her. His expression was unreadable, carefully neutral in a way that somehow felt more frightening than anger. "Why are you asking about this now?" "Because there's a woman on this plane who apparently has twins who are asking about their daddy, and you're acting like you've seen a ghost." The words hung in the pressurized air between them. George's phone buzzed again, and this time he didn't try to hide the screen. Sophia saw a text message preview. "The twins are beautiful, George. Jasmine has your eyes. Ethan has your stubborn chin. They deserve to know their father." Sophia's breath caught. "Oh my God. Those are your children, aren't they? Your actual children." George closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked older than his 45 years. When he opened them again, the charming mask was completely gone, replaced by something raw and cornered. It's complicated. Complicated? Sophia's voice rose slightly, causing a few passengers in nearby seats to glance their way. You have 2 children that you've never mentioned, and their mother is on this plane. How is that complicated? It's just abandonment. From somewhere deeper in the aircraft, a baby's cry pierced the cabin noise. Both George and Sophia turned toward the sound involuntarily. The cry was joined by a second voice, higher and more insistent. Twins, crying in harmony, their voices carrying the unmistakable sound of children who wanted their parents' attention. George's hands were shaking now. Sophia stared at him as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You ran away from them, she whispered. You literally ran away from your own children. He didn't deny it. He couldn't, because the evidence was 30 rows behind them, getting louder with each passing moment. Are you feeling that tension building? If this story is giving you chills, you need to hit that like button and keep watching because we're about to witness something absolutely incredible. The crying continued for nearly 10 minutes. Other passengers were getting restless, murmuring among themselves, some shooting annoyed glances toward economy class. George sat frozen in his seat, every cry from his children feeling like an accusation. Sophia had fallen silent, her champagne untouched, her earlier excitement completely evaporated. Finally, a flight attendant approached their row. Mr. Whitmore, the children in economy are quite upset. Their mother asked if you might come back and help settle them. She said they would recognize your voice. The request hung in the air like a challenge. Every passenger within earshot was now openly staring. Some had their phones out, recording. I don't know what you're talking about, he said quietly, but his voice lacked conviction. The flight attendant's expression didn't change. She also asked me to give you this. She handed him a small envelope, sealed with a piece of tape that had Daddy written on it in a child's crayon scrawl. George's hands shook as he took the envelope. Inside was a photograph. 2 beautiful toddlers sitting in a sandbox, both with his distinctive dark eyes and cleft chin. On the back, in Clara's careful handwriting, Jasmine Rose Chen Whitmore, age 18 months. Ethan George Chen Whitmore, age 18 months. They know your name. Do you know theirs? Sophia looked at the photograph over his shoulder and made a small sound of distress. They look exactly like you. The flight attendant was still waiting. Will you be coming to help with the children, sir? George looked around the first-class cabin. Every eye was on him. Phones were recording. His carefully constructed public image was crumbling in real time. But those cries from economy class weren't stopping. His children, his actual biological children, were calling for him, and he was sitting in first class pretending they didn't exist. Slowly, as if moving through thick water, George unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. If you can feel the weight of this moment, smash that subscribe button because you know this confrontation is going to be epic. The walk from first class to row 28 felt like crossing a courtroom to face sentencing. Every passenger George passed seemed to be watching him, whispering to their companions, recording his shame on their devices. The children's cries had stopped, but somehow the silence felt even more ominous. He found Clara sitting by the window, both twins now calm in her arms. She looked up as he approached, and he was struck by how much she had changed. The soft, romantic woman he remembered had been replaced by someone harder, more focused. Her eyes held a calculating intelligence that he recognized. It was the same look he wore in boardrooms when he was about to destroy a competitor. Hello, George, she said quietly. Her voice was steady, controlled. I wondered when you'd come to meet your children properly. The twins looked up at him with curious, unafraid eyes. Jasmine, he could tell because she was wearing a pink dress, reached toward him with chubby fingers. Ethan was content to stay nestled against his mother's chest, but his dark eyes, so much like George's own, studied his father's face with surprising intensity. Clara, George managed to say, what are you doing here? Taking my children to meet their grandparents in Rome, she replied calmly. Your mother has been asking to see them for months. Didn't she tell you we'd been in touch? George's blood went cold. His mother, Catherine Whitmore, was the matriarch of both the family and the company. If she knew about the twins, if she'd been in contact with Clara. She knows, he whispered. Clara smiled, but it wasn't warm. She knows everything, George, about how you abandoned us, about how you've been hiding Jasmine and Ethan from the world, about Sophia. She nodded toward first class. Yes, I know about her too. Your mother is quite disappointed in her son's choices. Other passengers were pretending not to listen, but George could feel their attention like a physical weight. This wasn't a private conversation, it was a public trial, and he was losing badly. Jasmine made a soft sound and reached for him again. Instinctively, George found himself extending his hand, letting her tiny fingers wrap around his index finger. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She's beautiful, he said, and the words came out rougher than he intended. They both are, Clara replied. They're also brilliant, funny, and kind. Jasmine loves music and books. Ethan is fascinated by anything mechanical. They ask about their daddy every day. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. Clara, You what? Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. You're sorry? You made a mistake? You want to make things right? George looked down at his daughter's tiny hand still gripping his finger, at his son's trusting eyes, and felt something crack inside his chest. Yes, all of that. Clara studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. This is a copy of the custody agreement I'm filing when we land in Rome. I'm requesting full custody, child support, and a restraining order preventing you from coming within 500 feet of the children unless supervised visits are court-approved. George's head snapped up. What? You abandoned them, George. You've made it clear that you don't want to be their father. So I'm making it official. But I didn't say I didn't want to be their father. Actions speak louder than words. Clara's voice was getting quieter, more dangerous. You disappeared when I told you I was pregnant. You've sent exactly 0 birthday cards, 0 Christmas presents, 0 phone calls. Jasmine was making happy babbling sounds, still playing with his finger. Ethan had fallen asleep against Clara's shoulder, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. They were perfect, innocent, and completely unaware that their father was a coward. What do you want from me? George asked quietly. Clara looked up at him with those calculating eyes. I want you to decide right here, right now, whether you're their father or just a sperm donor. Because after this flight, there won't be any more chances. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. Around them, passengers were still watching, still recording. His phone was buzzing constantly with what he assumed were calls from his PR team, his lawyers, his wife. I need time to think, he said. Clara shook her head. You've had 18 months to think. Time's up. She stood gracefully, adjusting both children in her arms with the practiced ease of a single mother who had learned to manage everything alone. There's something else you should know, she said, looking directly into his eyes. I'm not doing this for revenge, George. I'm doing this for them. They deserve better than a father who's ashamed of their existence. She moved past him toward the aisle, heading back toward the bathroom to change Ethan's diaper. As she walked away, she said over her shoulder, Your mother is planning to announce her new grandchildren at the company board meeting next week. You might want to prepare your wife. George stood frozen in the narrow aisle, watching Clara disappear toward the back of the plane with his children. Children who looked like him, who had his eyes and his stubborn chin, who deserved so much better than what he had given them. Guys, can you feel the emotional intensity of this moment? This is about to get even more incredible. Hit that subscribe button and keep watching. When George finally returned to first class 20 minutes later, Sophia was gone. Her seat was empty, her champagne glass abandoned, her purse missing. The flight attendant approached as he sat down heavily. Your companion moved to an available seat in premium economy, she said diplomatically. She said she needed space to think. George nodded numbly. He couldn't blame her. His phone had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. His wife, Margaret. George, I'm seeing disturbing rumors online. Call me immediately. His publicist. We need to get ahead of this story. His mother. It's time you faced your responsibilities, son. But it was the last message that made his hands shake. Daddy, come play. It was from Clara's phone, but the voice message was clearly from one of the twins, Jasmine, he thought, babbling happily into the microphone. 2 hours into the flight, the story had exploded across social media. Chuck's Whitmore scandal was trending on Twitter. Someone had posted a video of him walking through the economy cabin, and the internet had done what it does best, filled in all the gaps with speculation, outrage, and judgment. His stock price was already falling. The board of directors was demanding an emergency meeting. 3 major pharmaceutical clients had issued statements about reviewing their partnerships. But none of that mattered as much as the sound of his daughter's voice saying, "Daddy, come play." George unbuckled his seatbelt and walked back to economy class. This time, Clara was ready for him. Both twins were awake, sitting on her lap, looking around the cabin with fearless curiosity. "I want to hold them," George said without preamble. Clara studied his face. "Why?" "Because they're my children. Because I've been a coward. Because I want to try to be better." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she shifted Jasmine in her arms. "Jasmine first. Support her head." George's hands shook as he took his daughter. She was so small, so perfect, so trusting as she settled against his chest. She smelled like baby powder and something uniquely her own. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered against her soft hair. "I'm your daddy." Jasmine looked up at him with those serious dark eyes and made a happy gurgling sound. Then she grabbed his nose with both tiny hands and squeezed, giggling when he made an exaggerated "ow" sound. For the first time in 18 months, George Whitmore smiled genuinely. Ethan was watching this interaction with solemn concentration. When George looked over at him, the little boy raised his arms in the universal toddler signal for "pick me up too." "Both of them?" George asked. Clara helped arrange both twins in his arms. They were heavier than he expected, more solid and real. Jasmine immediately began exploring his face with her fingers, while Ethan settled against his shoulder like he belonged there. "They're perfect," George said, and his voice broke slightly. "Yes, they are," Clara replied. "And they've been perfect for 18 months, George. Every day you missed, every milestone you weren't there for, those are gone forever." He looked up at her, seeing the pain beneath her composed exterior. I know I can't get that time back, but I want to be here for everything that comes next." "What about your wife? Your public image? Your company?" George looked down at his children, at Jasmine's fingers wrapped around his thumb, at Ethan's sleepy eyes starting to drift closed against his shoulder. "They'll have to adjust," he said simply. "These are my children. I should have chosen them from the beginning." Clara's expression softened slightly. "It won't be easy. The media attention, the custody arrangements, the integration into your existing life, it's all going to be complicated." "I know, but I want to try. If you'll let me." She was quiet for a long time, watching him hold their children. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out that thick folder again. "There are 2 versions of the custody agreement," she said. "One that terminates your parental rights completely, and one that establishes joint custody with specific requirements for your involvement." "What kind of requirements?" "Mandatory parenting classes, regular supervised visits until you prove you can handle unsupervised time, financial support, obviously, and a commitment that they're not going to be hidden anymore. No more secret children, George. If you're going to be their father, you're going to be their father publicly." George thought about his wife, his board of directors, the media storm that was already beginning. Then he looked down at Jasmine, who was now trying to eat his tie, and Ethan, who had fallen asleep with his tiny fist clutched in George's shirt. "What do I need to sign? This is the moment everything changes. If you're feeling the emotion of this incredible turning point, smash that like button and let us know in the comments. Do you think George can really change? The remaining 7 hours of the flight passed in a strange, surreal bubble. George spent most of it in economy class, learning how to change diapers at 40,000 feet, feeding his children from bottles that Clara prepared, reading them picture books in the awkward space between airline seats. "You're a natural," the elderly woman across the aisle commented as George successfully got both twins to sleep simultaneously. He looked down at his children, finally understanding what he had almost lost forever. "I've got a lot of catching up to do." Clara had been watching him throughout the flight, her expression gradually shifting from skepticism to cautious hope. When the twins were both asleep and the cabin lights had dimmed, she finally spoke about the elephant hovering between them. "What are you going to tell your wife?" George was quiet for a long moment, gently rocking Jasmine while she slept against his chest. "The truth. That I made terrible choices. That I have 2 children I should have acknowledged from the beginning. That I need to figure out how to be the father and husband I should have been all along. And if she can't handle it, then I guess I'll learn what you learned 18 months ago. How to be a single parent." Clara studied his profile in the dim cabin lighting. "It's not easy, George. Being responsible for them 24 hours a day, making every decision alone, worrying about their future constantly. I know. And I know I can't undo the fact that you've been doing it all alone while I was pretending they didn't exist." He looked up at her. "But I want to learn. I want to be the father they deserve. Even if it costs you everything else?" George looked down at Ethan, sleeping peacefully in his arms, completely trusting. "Maybe everything else isn't worth as much as I thought it was." When the plane finally began its descent into Rome, George felt like a different person than the man who had boarded in New York. The businessman who had been so concerned with image and control had been replaced by a father who had spent 9 hours learning that the most important things in life couldn't be managed or manipulated. They could only be loved. Clara gathered her things as the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated for landing. "Your mother will be waiting at the airport," she said. "She's very eager to meet her grandchildren properly." "And to express her disappointment in her son properly?" Clara smiled, the first genuinely warm smile she'd given him since he'd walked back to economy class. "She's proud of you for finally showing up, George. Better late than never." As the plane touched down in Rome, George realized that this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of the hardest, most important work of his life, learning how to be the father his children needed and the man he should have been all along. The wheels touched the runway with a gentle bump, and George Whitmore began the most important journey of his life. The journey back to his children, back to responsibility, back to being worthy of the trust he saw in their eyes. If this incredible story of redemption and second chances has moved you, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing stories. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the power of choosing what really matters. 6 months later, the playground in Central Park was alive with the sounds of children laughing. George pushed Jasmine on the swing while Clara helped Ethan navigate the climbing structure. "Higher, Daddy," Jasmine squealed with delight. "Higher it is, Princess," George laughed, giving her another gentle push. The word Daddy still sent a warm shock through his system every time he heard it. Ethan had conquered the small slide and was clapping proudly. "Mama, look! I did it! I saw, sweetheart! You're so brave!" Clara beamed, then caught George's eye across the playground. They shared a smile, the complicated, careful smile of 2 people learning to co-parent after everything they'd been through. The custody arrangement was working better than either had expected. George had weekends and 2 evenings during the week. He had moved out of the penthouse he'd shared with Margaret and into a smaller apartment in Brooklyn, one with a proper nursery and a playground within walking distance. The media frenzy had died down eventually, though not before costing George his position as CEO and nearly half his net worth in the divorce settlement. But watching Jasmine pump her legs to make the swing go higher, seeing Oliver's face light up when he spotted his father across the playground, George knew he had gained far more than he'd lost. "Ice cream now?" Jasmine asked hopefully. Clara checked her watch. It's almost dinner time. Please, Mama, both twins chorused. George looked at Clara questioningly. They had established a rule that major decisions needed to be mutual. 20 minutes, Clara conceded. But then it's straight home for real food. Yes, the twins cheered in unison. As they walked toward the ice cream vendor, Jasmine holding George's hand while Ethan rode on his shoulders, Clara fell into step beside them. The custody hearing is next week, she said quietly. Are you ready? George nodded. My lawyer thinks the judge will approve the modification to increase my custody time. The parenting classes helped. You've done the work, George, Clara said simply. That matters. They had both done the work. Months of family therapy, co-parenting counseling, legal mediations, and gradual trust building. It hadn't been easy. There had been arguments about scheduling, disagreements about discipline, moments when old resentments flared up. But there had also been moments like this. Watching their children play together, seeing the joy on their faces when Daddy and Mama were both present, witnessing the small daily miracles of raising two incredible human beings. As they found a bench where the twins could eat their ice cream, George's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then put it away without responding. Work? Clara asked. My mother, actually. She wants to know if she can take the twins to the Natural History Museum tomorrow. That sounds fun for them, Clara said. Clara? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For getting on that plane, for forcing me to see what I was throwing away, for giving me another chance to be their father. Clara was quiet for a moment, wiping chocolate off Ethan's chin. I didn't do it for you, George. I did it for them. I know. But it saved me too. She looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing the man who had learned to change diapers and read bedtime stories, who had rearranged his entire life around nap schedules and playground visits, who had chosen his children over his image. You saved yourself, she said finally. I just made it impossible for you to keep running away. Ethan finished his ice cream and immediately wanted to go back to the playground. Jasmine, more methodical by nature, was still working on her cone. George lifted Ethan onto his shoulders again. Race you to the swings, buddy. Wait for Jasmine, Ethan protested, because somewhere along the way he had learned that families stick together. Of course we'll wait for Jasmine, George said, his voice soft with wonder at his son's natural generosity. We're a team. And as they walked back toward the playground, George carrying Ethan, Clara holding Jasmine's sticky hand, all of them together in the golden afternoon light. It was hard to remember why George had ever thought anything else mattered more than this. What an incredible journey from betrayal to redemption. If this story of second chances and family love has touched your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about what really matters in life. Drop a comment and let us know. Do you believe people can really change? Have you ever had to fight for what matters most? Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to choose love over pride. Thanks for watching, and remember, the most important flights we take aren't to distant destinations, but back to the people who matter most. Until next time, keep choosing love, keep choosing family, and never underestimate the power of a brave parent fighting for their children.